The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Colonel Marcus Reed stepped out of his black sedan. At 53, he carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who had spent 3 decades in the Marine Corps. His chest displayed rows of ribbons that told stories of battles fought in places most civilians couldn't pronounce. Today, he was visiting the elite Navy SEAL training compound for a special demonstration. "Colonel Reed, welcome to our facility," said Commander Sarah Walsh, extending her hand. She was a compact woman with steel-gray eyes that had seen more combat than most soldiers twice her size. "We have everything prepared for the evaluation." Reed nodded curtly. He had been sent by the Pentagon to assess a new experimental training program that claimed to produce marksmen with unprecedented accuracy. The military was always looking for ways to improve their elite forces, especially in an era where precision shooting could mean the difference between mission success and international incident. The shooting range stretched out before them like a long, concrete valley. Targets dotted the landscape at various distances, from simple paper bullseyes at 50 yards to complex moving targets at 800 yards. The facility boasted the most advanced shooting technology available, with computerized scoring systems and environmental sensors that could measure wind speed down to the 10th of a mile per hour. "Our boys have been training here for 6 months," Commander Walsh explained as they walked toward the range. "We've seen improvements in accuracy that honestly surprised even our most optimistic instructors." Reed watched as a team of Navy SEALs prepare their weapons. These were not ordinary soldiers. Each man had survived months of grueling selection processes that broke 9 out of 10 candidates. They were the pinnacle of military training, men who could operate behind enemy lines for weeks without support, who could shoot, move, and communicate under conditions that would paralyze lesser warriors. The first SEAL stepped up to the firing line. Petty Officer First Class Jake Morrison had been in the teams for 8 years. His file showed confirmed kills in 3 different theaters of operation. When Morrison took his shooting stance, every movement was economical and precise. He controlled his breathing like a meditation master, his finger finding the trigger with the familiarity of a pianist touching keys. The shots rang out in a steady rhythm. Morrison was firing at a target 300 yards away, aiming for a circle no bigger than a dinner plate. Through his binoculars, Reed watched the bullets tear through the target in a tight grouping that would make an Olympic marksman proud. When the scoring computer announced the results, Morrison had achieved 96% accuracy. "Impressive," Reed admitted, though his voice remained neutral. He had seen exceptional shooting before, and while Morrison's performance was certainly above average, it wasn't revolutionary. The next SEAL took his position. Chief Petty Officer David Chun had a reputation for making impossible shots under pressure. In Afghanistan, he had neutralized a sniper from over 600 yards while under heavy fire. Chun's approach was different from Morrison's. Where Morrison was methodical, Chun seemed to find his rhythm through instinct. Chun's target was positioned at 500 yards, and it was moving on a mechanical track. The challenge wasn't just distance, but timing. Chun watched the target's movement pattern for 30 seconds, then raised his rifle. His shots came in quick succession, each one timed to intercept the target at precisely the right moment. The scoring system registered 94% accuracy. Reed made notes on his tablet. These were certainly skilled marksmen, but nothing he was seeing justified the excitement he had been hearing from Pentagon officials. The SEAL training program was producing excellent results, but excellent had always been the standard for these units. Commander Walsh seemed to sense his thoughts. "Colonel, I think you might want to see our newest addition to the program. She's been here for only 3 weeks, but her progress has been extraordinary." Reed raised an eyebrow. The SEAL teams had only recently begun integrating female operators, and it remained a controversial topic. Reed wasn't opposed to women in combat roles, but he was skeptical of claims about exceptional performance that couldn't be backed up by hard data. "Who exactly are we talking about?" Reed asked. "Staff Sergeant Maria Santos. She came to us from the Army Marksmanship Unit. 22 years old, grew up on a ranch in Montana. Her father taught her to shoot when she was 8 years old, hunting deer and elk in the mountains." Reed nodded. Rural background, early exposure to firearms, military training. It was a common profile for skilled marksmen. What makes her special? See for yourself, Walsh said, pointing toward the range entrance. Maria Santos didn't look like what most people imagine when they thought of an elite military marksman. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her uniform was standard issue, clean and pressed, but showing signs of regular use. What caught Reed's attention were her hands. They were steady and relaxed, with the calluses that came from years of handling weapons and equipment. Santos approached the 2 officers and rendered a sharp salute. "Colonel Reed, Commander Walsh." "Staff Sergeant Santos." Reed returned the salute. "I understand you're going to demonstrate your marksmanship skills today." "Yes, sir. I'm ready whenever you are." Reed studied her face. There was no nervousness, no eagerness to impress. Santos had the calm confidence that Reed associated with seasoned combat veterans, though her file indicated she had never been deployed overseas. Her military experience consisted entirely of training and competition shooting. "What's your background, Santos?" Reed asked. "Grew up in Montana, sir. My family runs a cattle ranch about 50 miles from the nearest town. Started shooting when I was 8, mostly hunting and pest control. Joined the Army when I turned 18, spent 4 years with the marksmanship unit before requesting transfer to special operations training." Reed nodded. It was a straightforward background, nothing that suggested extraordinary ability. "And you think you can compete with Navy SEALs who have been training for years?" For the first time, Santos showed a slight smile. "I'd like the opportunity to try, sir." Commander Walsh led them to a section of the range that Reed hadn't seen before. The targets here were more sophisticated, designed to simulate real-world combat scenarios. Some moved unpredictably on mechanical systems. Others were partially concealed behind barriers, and several were positioned at extreme distances that pushed the limits of even the best equipment. "Santos has been working with our most challenging scenarios," Walsh explained. "The targets she'll engage today are the same ones we use for final qualification testing." Reed was skeptical. Final qualification for SEAL marksmen was notoriously difficult. The tests were designed to identify not just shooting ability, but the mental toughness required to perform under extreme stress. Many experienced soldiers failed these evaluations multiple times before achieving passing scores. Santos approached the firing line with her weapon, a precision rifle that had been customized for long-range accuracy. Reed noticed that she spent very little time adjusting the scope or checking equipment. Instead, she seemed to be studying the range itself, reading wind patterns and calculating angles with the intuitive understanding that came from years of hunting in mountain terrain. "The first target is at 600 yards, Walsh announced. "It will appear for 30 seconds, then disappear for 60 seconds. The sequence will repeat 5 times. Reed watched through his binoculars as a target popped up in the distance. It was barely visible, a human silhouette against a backdrop of brown and green camouflage. Santos didn't rush. She settled into her shooting position like she was getting comfortable in her favorite chair. The first shot rang out. Through the binoculars, Reed saw the bullet strike the target dead center. The second shot followed 8 seconds later, again hitting the center of the target. Santos fired 5 rounds before the target disappeared, and every shot found its mark. 5 for 5, the range computer announced. Reed lowered his binoculars. That was impressive, but not unprecedented. The real test would come with the more challenging targets. The second scenario involved multiple targets at varying distances, appearing and disappearing in random patterns. Santos would need to prioritize threats, adjust for different ranges, and transition between targets quickly enough to engage each one before it disappeared. Santos studied the range for a moment, then nodded to Commander Walsh. "Ready." The targets began their sequence. A silhouette appeared at 400 yards, another at 700 yards, a third at 300 yards. Santos engaged the closest target first, a tactical decision that made sense. Her shots came in a steady rhythm, each one carefully aimed but delivered without hesitation. Reed watched in growing amazement as Santos systematically engaged each target. She wasn't just hitting them, she was hitting them in precisely the spots that would disable or eliminate a human threat. Her target transitions were smooth and efficient, wasting no time, but never rushing to the point of sacrificing accuracy. When the sequence ended, the computer announced the results. 12 targets engaged, 12 hits achieved. Average score, 98.7%. Commander Walsh glanced at Colonel Reed. That's the highest score we've recorded for this scenario. Most of our experienced SEALs average around 91%. Reed made more notes on his tablet, but his skepticism was beginning to fade. Santos had just outperformed some of the best marksmen in the military on one of the most challenging shooting tests available. Let's see the final scenario, Reed said. The final test was designed to simulate the most extreme conditions a military marksman might face. Targets appeared at distances up to 1,000 yards. Some were moving, others were partially concealed, and the sequence included simulated wind and weather conditions created by fans and water misters positioned around the range. Santos took her position for the final test. Reed noticed that she seemed more relaxed than before, not less. The increased difficulty didn't appear to create stress, but rather a kind of focused calm that reminded Reed of the very best soldiers he had known. This scenario has a 90-second time limit, Walsh announced. Targets will appear and disappear randomly. Wind simulation is active. Scoring is based on both accuracy and number of successful engagements. Santos nodded and settled behind her rifle. Reed found himself holding his breath as the scenario began. What happened next was unlike anything Reed had seen in 30 years of military service. Santos moved through the target sequence like she was conducting an orchestra. Her shots were placed with surgical precision. Her target transitions were seamless, and she seemed to anticipate where targets would appear before they became visible. At one point, a target appeared at 900 yards while wind machines created gusting conditions that would challenge even the most experienced sniper. Santos made a small adjustment to her scope, calculated the wind effect in seconds, and fired. The bullet struck the target's center mass despite conditions that should have made such a shot nearly impossible. When the scenario ended, silence fell over the range. Even the SEALs who had been watching from the side had stopped talking. The computer processed the results for what seemed like an eternity before announcing the score. 15 targets engaged, 15 hits achieved. Average score, 99.3%. Time remaining, 18 seconds. Reed stared at the numbers on the display screen. In all his years of evaluating military personnel, he had never seen a perfect performance on this particular test. Santos hadn't just passed the most difficult marksmanship evaluation in the SEAL training program. She had shattered the existing records. Commander Walsh was grinning. "Colonel, I think we might have found what the Pentagon was looking for." Reed closed his tablet and walked towards Santos, who was securing her weapon with the same calm efficiency she had shown throughout the demonstration. As he approached, Reed found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about exceptional military performance. "Staff Sergeant Santos," he said, "that was quite impressive." "Thank you, sir. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Santos considered the question for a moment. "I guess it started with hunting, sir. When you're putting food on your family's table, you learn not to waste ammunition. Every shot has to count." Reed nodded, but he knew there was more to it than childhood hunting experience. What he had just witnessed was the kind of natural ability that appeared perhaps once in a generation, combined with training and mental discipline that couldn't be taught through conventional methods. As they walked back toward the facility buildings, Reed's mind was already working through the implications. If Santos could perform at this level after only 3 weeks of SEAL training, what might she achieve with months or years of specialized development? More importantly, what did her abilities suggest about the potential for other exceptional individuals who might be overlooked by conventional recruitment and evaluation processes? The sun was setting behind the mountains as Reed prepared to leave the facility. His report to the Pentagon would be unlike any he had written before. For the first time in his career, He had encountered a soldier whose abilities seemed to transcend normal human limitations. The question wasn't whether Santos belonged in the elite special operations community. The question was whether the special operations community was ready for someone like Maria Santos. Colonel Reed couldn't sleep that night. He sat in his hotel room overlooking the Pacific Ocean, typing notes on his laptop while the events of the day replayed in his mind. Santos's performance had been so far beyond normal parameters that it challenged everything he understood about human potential and military training. At 0500 hours, Reed was already dressed and heading back to the SEAL facility. He had called Commander Walsh the previous evening to request additional time with Santos and access to her complete training records. If he was going to recommend Santos for classified programs, he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. The facility was already bustling with activity when Reed arrived. SEALs were conducting their morning physical training, the sound of boots on pavement and shouted cadences echoing across the compound. Reed found Commander Walsh in her office, surrounded by file folders and computer printouts. "Colonel, I pulled everything we have on Santos," Walsh said, gesturing to a stack of documents. "Her records are surprisingly thin for someone with her abilities." Reed settled into a chair and began reading. Santos's military file was straightforward but unremarkable. Standard Army basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, followed by assignment to the Army Marksmanship Unit at Fort Benning. Her scores were excellent, but not extraordinary. Nothing in her early military career suggested the exceptional performance Reed had witnessed. "What about her civilian background?" Reed asked. "That's where things get interesting," Walsh replied, handing him another folder. "I made some calls to Montana last night." Santos grew up on the Bear Creek Ranch, about 3,000 acres in the Beartooth Mountains. Her father, Miguel Santos, is a second-generation Mexican-American who bought the ranch in 1995. Her mother, Patricia, is a former nurse who homeschooled Maria and her two brothers. Reed scanned the documents. The Santos family had lived an isolated but self-sufficient life. The nearest town, Cook City, had a population of fewer than 100 people. The ranch was accessible only by a dirt road that became impassable during winter months. For 6 months of the year, the Santos family was essentially cut off from the outside world. Miguel Santos taught all his children to hunt and shoot, Walsh continued. "According to locals I spoke with, it was a matter of survival. The ranch was too remote for regular grocery deliveries, and the family depended on hunting deer, elk, and smaller game to supplement their food supply." Reed nodded. Many rural children learned to shoot for practical purposes, but that alone didn't explain Santos's exceptional abilities. "What else did you learn?" "Here's where it gets unusual," Walsh said, pulling out a photograph. It showed a young girl, perhaps 10 years old, standing next to a massive elk. The girl was holding a rifle that seemed too large for her small frame. This was taken when Maria was 10. She made that shot from 400 yards in windy conditions. Reed studied the photograph. The elk in the picture was enormous, the kind of mature bull that experienced hunters pursued for years without success. For a 10-year-old child to make such a shot suggested either extraordinary luck or extraordinary skill. "I spoke with Tom Bradley, who runs the local sporting goods store in Cook City," Walsh continued. "He's lived there for 40 years and knows everyone in the area." According to Bradley, Maria Santos was already legendary among local hunters by the time she was 15. Guides would bring clients from all over the country, and Maria would routinely outshoot men with decades of experience. Reed made notes as Walsh talked. The picture emerging was of a child who had developed exceptional marksmanship skills in isolation, without formal training or sophisticated equipment. The Santos family had operated their ranch successfully for over 20 years, which suggested they were intelligent and resourceful, but nothing indicated specialized knowledge of advanced shooting techniques. "Did you find anything about her training methods?" Reed asked. "That's the strangest part," Walsh replied. "According to everyone I spoke with, Maria never received formal instruction. Her father taught her basic safety and hunting ethics, but her shooting ability seemed to develop naturally. Tom Bradley described it as supernatural, though he admitted that sounded ridiculous. Reed frowned. In his experience, exceptional military performance always resulted from a combination of natural talent and intensive training. Even the most gifted athletes required coaching and practice to reach elite levels. The idea that Santos had developed world-class marksmanship skills through informal hunting experience challenged fundamental assumptions about skill development. "I want to talk to her directly," Reed said. "Can you arrange a private interview?" "She's already waiting in conference room B," Walsh replied with a smile. "I thought you might want to ask her some questions." Reed found Santos seated at a small table, reading a technical manual about advanced ballistics. She looked up when he entered and stood to attention. "At ease, Staff Sergeant," Reed said, taking a seat across from her. "I want to ask you about your background." "Yes, sir. Tell me about growing up in Montana. Specifically, how you learned to shoot." Santos relaxed slightly. "My father started teaching me when I was 8, sir. Basic safety, how to clean and maintain weapons, hunting ethics. But most of what I learned came from practice and observation." "What kind of practice?" "Daily shooting, sir. My father required all of us children to practice every day, year-round. We had targets set up at various distances around the ranch. During winter months, when we couldn't hunt, we would shoot at least 100 rounds per day." Reed calculated quickly. If Santos had practiced daily from age 8 to 18, she would have fired well over 300,000 rounds before enlisting in the Army. That level of practice could certainly contribute to exceptional skill, but it still didn't fully explain her performance. "What distances were you shooting at?" Reed asked. "Started at 50 yards when I was 8, Santos replied. "By the time I was 12, I was regularly shooting at 300 yards. When I turned 15, my father set up targets out to 800 yards. 800 yards, Reed repeated. "That's a very long shot, even for experienced marksmen." "Yes, sir. But hunting elk in the Beartooth Mountains, you often don't have the option of getting closer. The terrain is too open, and elk are very smart animals. If you can't make a clean shot at long range, you don't eat." Reed was beginning to understand. The Santos family hadn't been practicing recreational shooting. They had been training for survival. Every shot had real-world consequences, and failure meant going hungry. That kind of pressure could certainly accelerate skill development. "Tell me about your equipment," Reed said. "What rifles were you using?" "Started with a .22 caliber rifle for small game and practice. When I got bigger, my father bought me a .308 Winchester for deer and elk hunting. Nothing fancy, just a basic hunting rifle with a variable scope." Reed made notes. The .308 Winchester was a capable caliber for hunting, but it wasn't specialized sniper equipment. Santos had developed extraordinary accuracy using relatively basic civilian firearms. "Did you compete in shooting sports?" "No, sir. The nearest competition was over 200 miles away, and we couldn't afford the travel and entry fees. Our shooting was purely practical." That was significant. Santos had never been exposed to competitive shooting techniques or advanced coaching. Her skills had developed in isolation, without influence from established marksmanship traditions. "What about military training?" Reed asked. "How did you find a transition from hunting to military marksmanship?" "Honestly, sir, it was easier than I expected. The Army taught me about different weapons systems and military tactics, but the basic shooting skills were already there. I guess the biggest change was shooting at human silhouettes instead of game animals." Reed leaned back in his chair. Santos was describing her military transition as if it had been routine, but her performance suggested capabilities far beyond normal training outcomes. There was something she wasn't telling him, or something she wasn't aware of herself. "Staff Sergeant, yesterday you achieved scores that exceeded those of Navy SEALs with years of specialized training. How do you explain that?" For the first time, Santos seemed uncertain. "I'm not sure I can explain it, sir. When I'm shooting, everything just seems to slow down. I can see the wind patterns, feel the rifle's balance, predict where the target will be. It's like solving a puzzle, but the answer just comes to me naturally." That description triggered something in Reed's memory. He had read classified reports about soldiers who demonstrated unusual sensory abilities under stress. Some snipers reported time dilation effects during critical shots, and a few described enhanced visual perception that allowed them to see details at distances that should have been impossible. Have you ever been tested for enhanced sensory abilities? Reed asked. No, sir. What do you mean? Visual acuity, reaction time, spatial processing. The military has programs that identify individuals with exceptional sensory capabilities. Santos shook her head. Nothing like that, sir. I've never thought of myself as unusual. Reed made more notes. If Santos possessed enhanced sensory abilities, it could explain her extraordinary marksmanship performance. But it raised questions about whether such abilities could be identified and replicated in other soldiers. I want to run some additional tests, Reed said. Would you be willing to participate in expanded evaluations? Of course, sir. Reed stood and walked to the window overlooking the shooting range. Outside, SEALs were conducting training exercises, their movements precise and coordinated. These were among the most elite soldiers in the world, yet Santos had outperformed them after only 3 weeks of training. Staff Sergeant, what are your career goals? I want to serve in special operations, sir. I want to be part of a team that makes a difference. Reed turned back to face her. You understand that your performance yesterday was unprecedented. If word spreads about your abilities, you'll attract attention from programs that most people don't even know exist. Santos met his gaze steadily. I understand, sir. I'm ready for whatever challenges come next. Reed believed her. Despite her youth and relatively limited military experience, Santos possessed the kind of mental toughness that couldn't be taught. She had grown up in an environment that demanded self-reliance and precision, and she had adapted to military service with remarkable ease. I'm going to make some calls, Reed said. There are people who need to know about you and programs that could benefit from your skills. But I want you to understand something important. Yes, sir. Once you enter the world of classified special operations, your life will never be the same. You'll be asked to do things that ordinary soldiers never face, in places that don't officially exist, against threats that the public never hears about. Are you prepared for that? Santos didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. That's exactly what I want. Reed spent the next several hours on secure phone calls to Pentagon offices that didn't appear on any organizational charts. Santos's performance had caught the attention of people whose job was to identify exceptional individuals for classified programs. By late afternoon, Reed had received authorization to conduct expanded evaluations. The additional tests were scheduled for the following day. Santos would be assessed by specialists from multiple agencies, using equipment and protocols that pushed the boundaries of human performance measurement. If the tests confirmed Reed's suspicions, Santos would be offered opportunities that few soldiers ever encountered. As Reed prepared to leave the facility that evening, he reflected on the strange turn his routine evaluation had taken. He had come to assess a training program, and instead discovered an individual whose abilities challenged conventional understanding of human potential. Whatever Santos's ultimate destination, Reed knew that her story was just beginning. The next morning would bring answers to questions that Reed hadn't known to ask. For now, he could only wonder what other exceptional individuals might be hidden in the vast apparatus of the military, waiting for someone to recognize their unique capabilities. Santos had proven that extraordinary potential could emerge from the most ordinary backgrounds, and that insight alone was worth more than any training program evaluation. The colonel walked to his car as the sun set behind the California hills, already mentally composing the classified report that would change Maria Santos's life forever. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived at the SEAL facility before dawn, her black SUV followed by a convoy of unmarked vehicles carrying equipment that most soldiers would never see. As the Pentagon's leading specialist in human performance enhancement, she had evaluated hundreds of candidates for classified programs. Colonel Reed's urgent request for an immediate assessment had interrupted her vacation, but his preliminary report suggested Santos might be worth the disruption. Dr. Vasquez, thank you for coming on such short notice, Reed said as they met in the facility's conference room. Joining them was Commander Walsh and a man Reed didn't recognize, wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself with military bearing. "Colonel, this is Dr. James Chun from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency," Vasquez said. "When I briefed my superiors on your initial report, DARPA requested direct involvement in the evaluation." Reed shook hands with Dr. Chun, wondering exactly what kind of attention Santos had attracted. DARPA's involvement suggested that her abilities might have implications beyond normal special operations applications. "We've brought some specialized equipment," Dr. Chun explained. "If Staff Sergeant Santos demonstrates the capabilities you described, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Through the conference room window, Reed could see technicians unloading devices that looked more like they belonged in a research laboratory than on a military base. There were computer workstations, sensors mounted on articulated arms, and what appeared to be an advanced eye-tracking system. "What exactly are you planning to test?" Commander Walsh asked. Dr. Vasquez consulted her tablet. "Visual acuity, reaction time, hand-eye coordination, spatial processing, predictive tracking, stress response, and several classified parameters that I can't discuss in detail. We need to establish whether Santos possesses measurable physiological advantages or if her performance results from exceptional training and mental discipline." An hour later, Santos reported to the testing facility that had been hastily assembled in one of the base's aircraft hangars. The space had been transformed into something that resembled a high-tech laboratory crossed with an elaborate shooting range. Sensors and cameras were positioned at multiple angles, connected to computers that would analyze every aspect of her performance. "Staff Sergeant Santos, I'm Dr. Vasquez," the lead researcher said, approaching with a warm smile. "We're going to run some tests today to better understand your capabilities. Nothing you'll do here will affect your military record or career prospects. We're simply gathering information." Santos nodded. "Yes, ma'am. What kind of tests?" "We'll start with basic measurements, then progress to more complex scenarios. Think of it as an extended physical examination combined with advanced marksmanship evaluation." The first test measured Santos's visual acuity using charts and patterns that were far more sophisticated than standard eye examinations. Dr. Chun monitored the results on his computer, occasionally making notes that he shared with no one else. 2015 vision in both eyes, Dr. Vasquez announced. "That's significantly better than normal, but not unprecedented among elite marksmen." The next series of tests measured reaction time and hand-eye coordination. Santos sat in front of a computer screen that displayed targets appearing and disappearing in random patterns. Her job was to touch each target as quickly as possible. The system measured her response time down to milliseconds. Average reaction time, 143 milliseconds, Dr. Chin said, studying his display. "That's in the top 1% of human performance, but still within normal ranges." Reed watched the testing process with growing curiosity. Santos was performing well on every measurement, but nothing suggested superhuman abilities. Yet he had witnessed shooting performance that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. There had to be something the tests weren't capturing. The spatial processing evaluation was more complex. Santos wore a virtual reality headset that presented three-dimensional scenarios requiring her to calculate distances, predict movements, and solve geometric problems. The system tracked her eye movements and measured how quickly she processed visual information. "Exceptional spatial intelligence," Dr. Vasquez noted. 98th percentile for pattern recognition and predictive modeling. That's consistent with elite marksman performance, but, again, not outside normal human ranges. Dr. Chin seemed less impressed than Reed had expected. After 3 hours of testing, Santos's results showed she was exceptionally capable, but not demonstrably superhuman. Reed began to wonder if he had overestimated the significance of her shooting performance. "Let's move to the practical shooting evaluation," Dr. Vasquez said. "This is where we'll use our most advanced measurement systems." The shooting range had been equipped with sensors that could track bullet trajectories with microscopic precision. High-speed cameras captured every aspect of Santos's shooting technique, while biometric monitors measured her heart rate, breathing patterns, and stress responses. The targets themselves were computerized, capable of movement patterns that simulated real-world combat scenarios. Staff Sergeant, we're going to start with a baseline test, Dr. Chen explained. Static targets at known distances, no time pressure. We want to establish your normal accuracy parameters. Santos took her position behind a rifle that had been fitted with sensors measuring every aspect of its operation. When she fired, the computers captured data about trigger pressure, barrel movement, scope alignment, and dozens of other variables. Her first 10 shots produced a grouping at 300 yards that could be covered by silver dollar. The measuring systems confirmed what Reed had observed. Santos was shooting with precision that exceeded normal training outcomes. Now, let's try moving targets, Dr. Vasquez said. The computerized targets began their programmed movements, following patterns that simulated everything from walking to running to evasive action. Santos adjusted her shooting stance slightly and began engaging the targets. Her shots came in a steady rhythm, each one timed to intersect the target's projected position. Reed watched the computer displays as data flowed in real time. Santos's accuracy remained consistent even as the target movements became more complex. More importantly, the biometric monitors showed that her stress responses actually decreased as the difficulty increased. Her heart rate slowed, her breathing became more controlled, and her muscle tension decreased. That's unusual, Dr. Chen murmured, studying his screens. Most shooters show increased stress markers as difficulty increases. Santos appears to be entering a deeper state of calm. Flow state, Dr. Vasquez said. It's well documented in elite athletes. The individual becomes so focused on the task that external pressures disappear. But Santos is reaching that state much faster than we typically observe. The testing continued with increasingly complex scenarios. Santos engaged multiple targets at various distances while environmental systems simulated wind, weather, and battlefield conditions. Throughout each evolution, her performance remained remarkably consistent. But it was during the final test that something extraordinary happened. Dr. Chun had programmed a scenario that he privately believed was impossible. Targets appeared and disappeared at distances up to 1,200 yards. Some moving unpredictably, others partially concealed. Wind machines created gusting conditions that changed direction randomly. The test was designed to overwhelm even the most exceptional marksman. Santos studied the range for a moment, then settled into her shooting position. As the scenario began, Reed noticed something different in her posture. She seemed to be listening to something only she could hear, reading information that wasn't available to anyone else. Her first shot rang out, striking a target at 800 yards that had been visible for less than 2 seconds. The second shot followed immediately, hitting a moving target at 600 yards. Santos continued firing in a rhythm that seemed almost musical, each shot precisely timed and perfectly placed. What amazed the observers wasn't just her accuracy. Santos appeared to be anticipating where targets would appear before they became visible. She would adjust her aim to an empty section of the range, then fire the instant a target materialized in that exact location. How is she doing that? Commander Walsh whispered. Dr. Chun was frantically checking his computer displays. The targeting system is programmed with random algorithms. There's no pattern she could have memorized. Reed felt a chill run down his spine as the implications became clear. Santos hadn't just demonstrated exceptional marksmanship. She had apparently demonstrated precognitive abilities. Dr. Vasquez approached Santos, who was securing her rifle with her usual calm efficiency. Staff Sergeant, can you describe what you experienced during that final scenario? Santos looked thoughtful. It's hard to explain, ma'am. When I'm shooting, I can feel the rhythm of everything around me. The wind patterns, the mechanical systems, even the way people move. It's like I can see a few seconds into the future, but only for the specific area where I'm aiming. Have you always experienced this? Dr. Chen asked. I think so, sir. I never really thought about it until recently. When I was hunting as a child, I could always tell where an animal was going to move before it moved. My father called it hunter's intuition. Reed exchanged glances with the scientists. If Santos possessed some form of enhanced temporal perception, it would explain her extraordinary shooting performance. But it also raised questions that went far beyond military applications. We need to run additional tests, Dr. Vasquez said quietly to Reed. What we observed today could have implications for multiple classified research programs. Reed nodded, but he was thinking about larger issues. If Santos represented a new form of human capability, how many others like her might exist? And what did her abilities suggest about human potential in general? As the team began packing their equipment, Reed approached Santos. How do you feel about today's tests? Interesting, sir. I've never had my shooting analyzed in such detail. Staff Sergeant, I think you're going to receive some very unusual opportunities in the near future. Are you prepared for assignments that might take you far from conventional military service? Santos met his gaze with the same steady confidence she had shown from their first meeting. Sir, I joined the military to serve my country. However, I can best do that. I'm ready. Reed believed her, but he wondered if she truly understood what she was accepting. Santos's abilities had attracted attention from programs that operated in the shadows of the intelligence community, dealing with threats and challenges that the public never learned about. As the sun set over the Pacific, Reed knew that Santos's life was about to change in ways that neither of them could fully anticipate. The young woman from Montana had proven herself capable of things that challenged the boundaries of human potential. Now she would discover what the government did with such exceptional individuals. The classified world was always hungry for new capabilities, and Maria Santos represented a form of capability that had never been seen before. Reed could only hope that she was strong enough to handle what came next. 3 weeks after the extraordinary testing session, Santos received orders that changed everything. Instead of continuing with SEAL training, she was directed to report to a nondescript office building in Arlington, Virginia, for specialized assignment evaluation. The orders were signed by generals she had never heard of and classified at levels she didn't know existed. The building looked like any other government office complex, with glass facades and corporate landscaping that revealed nothing about the activities inside. Santos presented her identification to a security guard who checked her name against a list that wasn't visible to anyone else. Within minutes, she was escorted to an elevator that required a special key card and descended to floors that weren't marked on any building directory. Staff Sergeant Santos, welcome to the Strategic Applications Division, said the woman who met her on the 7th basement level. She appeared to be in her 40s, with graying hair and the kind of controlled demeanor that suggested extensive experience with classified operations. I'm Director Catherine Mitchell. We've been very interested in meeting you. Santos followed Director Mitchell through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly underground. The walls were lined with offices and laboratories behind reinforced glass, revealing glimpses of technology and activities that defied easy explanation. Scientists worked with equipment she couldn't identify, while personnel in various uniforms moved with purposeful urgency. What exactly is the Strategic Applications Division? Santos asked. We identify and develop unconventional capabilities for national security purposes, Mitchell replied. Our mission involves challenges that can't be addressed through traditional military or intelligence methods. They stopped at a conference room where Santos recognized several faces from her testing session. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chin were present, along with Colonel Reed and several other individuals she hadn't met. The atmosphere was different from the SEAL facility, more intense, more serious, with an undercurrent of excitement that suggested significant developments. Staff Sergeant, please take a seat, Director Mitchell said. We have some things to discuss. Santos settled into a chair while the assembled officials reviewed documents she couldn't see. The silence stretched for several minutes before Director Mitchell spoke again. Your test results have been analyzed by multiple agencies, Mitchell began. The conclusions are remarkable. You demonstrate what appears to be enhanced temporal perception combined with extraordinary sensory processing capabilities. What does that mean exactly? Santos asked. Dr. Chun leaned forward. Based on our measurements, you appear to process information from your environment at a rate that exceeds normal human capabilities. More importantly, you seem able to predict future states of dynamic systems with unprecedented accuracy. In practical terms, Colonel Reed added, you can anticipate events before they happen, at least within specific parameters. That's why you can hit targets that aren't fully visible yet, and why you perform better under stress rather than worse. Santos absorbed this information carefully. She had always known her shooting abilities were unusual, but the scientific explanation made her capabilities sound almost supernatural. Are there others like me? She asked. Director Mitchell exchanged glances with the other officials. That's classified information, but I can tell you that you're not completely unique. Throughout history, there have been individuals who demonstrated exceptional capabilities that couldn't be explained through conventional understanding of human potential. What happened to them? They served their country in ways that most people never learn about, Mitchell replied. We're hoping you'll consider doing the same. Santos had expected this moment since Colonel Reed's first evaluation. What kind of service? Dr. Vasquez opened a folder and spread photographs across the table. They showed locations around the world, some recognizable as major cities, others appearing to be remote wilderness areas or military installations. The threats facing our country are evolving, Dr. Vasquez explained. Traditional military force isn't always adequate for the challenges we face. Sometimes we need individuals with unique capabilities to address situations that would be impossible for conventional forces, such as precision operations where even the smallest mistake could have catastrophic consequences, Colonel Reed said. Situations where normal human limitations make success impossible. Director Mitchell activated a wall-mounted display screen that showed a map of the world with various locations marked in different colors. Staff Sergeant, are you familiar with the concept of surgical intervention in geopolitical conflicts? Yes, ma'am. Small-scale operations designed to achieve strategic objectives without large-scale military engagement. Exactly, but sometimes even our best special operations forces encounter limitations. Distance, weather, timing, target characteristics. There are scenarios where human capabilities simply aren't sufficient. Santos studied the map, noting that many of the marked locations were in regions known for instability and conflict. You're talking about assassination missions, among other things, Mitchell acknowledged, but also rescue operations, intelligence gathering, and prevention of catastrophic events. Your abilities would allow you to succeed where others would fail. Santos felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The opportunities being described were unlike anything she had imagined when she joined the military. At the same time, she understood that accepting would mean entering a world where mistakes could have global consequences. What will my training involve? Dr. Chun activated another display showing a complex facility that appeared to combine elements of a military base, research laboratory, and urban training environment. You would be assigned to a specialized program that develops enhanced operators for classified missions. The training would push your abilities to their maximum potential while preparing you for scenarios that most people couldn't imagine. Where is this facility? Multiple locations, Director Mitchell said. Some domestic, some overseas. The program operates with compartmented security that exceeds normal special operations protocols. Santos looked around the table at the assembled officials. Each face reflected a combination of professional interest and personal concern that suggested they understood the significance of what they were proposing. What guarantees do I have about the missions I would be assigned? None, Mitchell replied bluntly. Enhanced operators work under conditions where normal rules don't apply. You would be asked to do things that couldn't be officially acknowledged, in places that don't officially exist, against threats that the public never learns about. But, Colonel Reed added, you would also have the opportunity to prevent conflicts that could cost thousands of lives, stop terrorist attacks before they happen, and protect national interests in ways that conventional forces simply can't. Santos considered the proposal carefully. Her childhood on the Montana ranch had taught her to evaluate risks and make decisions based on available information rather than emotion. The opportunities being described were extraordinary, but so were the potential dangers. Can I ask about success rates? How often do enhanced operators complete their mission successfully? Dr. Vasquez consulted her notes. That information is classified, but I can tell you that enhanced operators have a significantly higher success rate than conventional special operations forces in comparable scenarios. What about casualties? The room fell silent. Director Mitchell finally spoke. Enhanced operators face risks that normal soldiers don't encounter. Some missions are successful, but cost the operator their life or sanity. Others fail completely, with consequences that extend far beyond the individual. Santos appreciated the honesty. Military service always involved risks, but the stakes being described were clearly higher than anything she had previously considered. If I accept, what happens to my normal military career? It ends, Mitchell said simply. Enhanced operators are removed from normal military structures. You would retain your rank and benefits, but your service record would become classified. As far as the regular military is concerned, you would simply disappear. What about my family? They will be told that you had been assigned to a classified program. No details, no contact information, no timeline for when you might return. Santos thought about her parents on the ranch in Montana. They had always supported her military service, but they didn't know about her exceptional abilities or the attention she had attracted. Disappearing into a classified program would be difficult for them to understand or accept. How long do I have to decide? 72 hours, Director Mitchell replied. If you decline, you'll be returned to normal SEAL training with no adverse impact on your career. This conversation never happened. And if I accept, you report to the training facility next Monday. Your civilian identity becomes a cover story. Your real life begins with whatever missions we assign. Santos stood and walked to the wall display showing global locations marked for various operations. Each marker represented situations where enhanced human capabilities might be the difference between success and catastrophe. The scope was overwhelming but also compelling. Director Mitchell, can you tell me how many enhanced operators are currently active? That's classified, but fewer than you might expect. Individuals with your capabilities are extremely rare. Santos returned to her seat. She thought about the ranch in Montana, the simple life she had left behind, and the extraordinary path that was opening before her. Her shooting abilities had been a source of pride and family tradition. Now, they represented potential service at the highest levels of national security. I have one more question, Santos said. In your assessment, are my capabilities sufficient to justify the risks involved in enhanced operations? Dr. Chun smiled slightly. Staff Sergeant, based on our testing, we believe you possess abilities that could revolutionize how certain classified missions are conducted. The question isn't whether you're capable enough. The question is whether we can develop training programs that maximize your potential. Santos nodded. She had always known that her shooting abilities would lead to unusual opportunities. The choice before her was whether to embrace those opportunities or return to a more conventional military career. As the meeting concluded, Santos was given a secure phone number and instructions for contacting Director Mitchell with her decision. She would spend the next 3 days in temporary quarters, isolated from outside communication, while she considered the most important choice of her life. Walking through the underground corridors toward the surface, Santos reflected on how quickly her world had changed. 6 months earlier, she had been an unknown Army marksman hoping for assignment to special operations. Now, she was being recruited for programs that operated beyond the boundaries of normal military service. The elevator ascended toward ground level, carrying Santos back to a world where her abilities were exceptional, but her future remained uncertain. In 72 hours, she would either begin the most extraordinary military career imaginable or return to the conventional path she had originally chosen. For Maria Santos, the decision would determine not just her own fate, but potentially the outcome of conflicts that hadn't yet begun. Santos spent her first day of isolation walking through Arlington National Cemetery. The endless rows of white headstones stretched across rolling hills, each marking a life sacrificed in service to the country. She read names and dates, calculating ages, and wondering about the stories behind the numbers. Many of the graves belonged to soldiers younger than herself, people who had made the ultimate sacrifice without knowing if their deaths would make any difference. The weight of the decision before her seemed to grow heavier with each grave she passed. The Enhanced Operator Program represented an opportunity to serve at the highest levels of national security, but it also meant accepting risks that went beyond conventional military service. The officials had been honest about the dangers, perhaps more honest than she had expected. On her second day, Santos called her parents from a secure phone in her temporary quarters. The conversation was difficult, knowing she couldn't explain the real reason for her call. "Mija, you sound troubled," her mother said. "Is everything all right with your training?" "I'm fine, Mama. I just wanted to hear your voices. Your father is out checking the cattle, but he'll be sorry he missed you. He's been telling everyone in town about his daughter training with the Navy SEALs." Santos smiled despite her anxiety. Her father had always been proud of her achievements, even when he didn't fully understand them. The idea of him bragging to neighbors about her SEAL training was both touching and painful, knowing that her real situation was far more complex. "Mama, if I received an assignment that meant I couldn't come home for a long time, would you and Papa be okay?" Her mother was quiet for several moments. "Maria, you've been independent since you were old enough to walk. Your father, and I raised you to make your own decisions and follow your own path. If your country needs you for something important, then you should do what you think is right. Even if I couldn't tell you what I was doing or when I might return, especially then, when your service becomes classified, it usually means it's more important, not less." Santos felt tears forming in her eyes. Her mother's wisdom and unconditional support reminded her why she had joined the military in the first place. The Santos family had always valued service and sacrifice, even when the costs were high. "I love you, Mama. Tell Papa I love him too. We love you too, Mija. Whatever you decide, we'll be proud of you." After the call ended, Santos sat in the silence of her quarters and tried to process her emotions. Her parents had raised her to serve something larger than herself, and the Enhanced Operator Program represented the ultimate expression of that principle. But accepting would mean leaving behind the simple life and clear values that had shaped her identity. On her final day, Santos returned to the underground facility for additional briefings. Director Mitchell had arranged for her to meet with two current enhanced operators who could answer questions about the reality of classified service. The first operator introduced himself only as Agent Parker. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with the kind of controlled demeanor that suggested extensive combat experience. His left hand showed surgical scars that indicated significant injury, but his movements were fluid and precise. "Staff Sergeant Santos, I understand you're considering joining our program," Parker said as they sat in a secure conference room. "I want to give you an honest assessment of what you'd be accepting. Please, enhanced operators work alone or in very small teams. There's no backup, no extraction plan, no second chances. If you fail, people die. If you succeed, nobody ever knows what you prevented. What kind of missions have you completed?" Parker considered the question carefully. "I can't discuss specifics, but I can tell you that enhanced operators handle situations where conventional forces would either fail completely or succeed at unacceptable cost. Preventing terrorist attacks, eliminating targets that threaten regional stability, retrieving intelligence that affects global security. How do you handle the psychological pressure?" "Some operators don't," Parker admitted. "The isolation, the moral complexity, the constant danger, it breaks people. But for those who can handle it, there's no more meaningful service available." The second operator was a woman who introduced herself as Agent Torres. She was older, perhaps in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. "The hardest part isn't the danger," Torres said. "It's the secrecy. You can never share your experiences, never seek recognition, never explain to your family why you sometimes wake up screaming. Your real life becomes a series of classified operations that officially never happened. But you've continued serving, Santos observed. For 15 years, Torres confirmed. Because I know that my work prevents conflicts that would cost thousands of lives. I've stopped terrorist attacks, prevented assassinations, eliminated threats that could have destabilized entire regions. The personal cost is high, but the alternative is unacceptable. Santos spent her final evening writing letters to her parents, her brothers, and a few close friends from her hometown. She couldn't explain her decision, but she wanted to leave them with messages expressing her love and gratitude for their support. The letters would be stored securely and delivered only if she was killed in action. The next morning, Santos reported to Director Mitchell's office with her decision. The underground facility seemed more familiar now, the corridors and security protocols less intimidating. She had spent 3 days considering the most important choice of her life, and she was ready to commit. Director Mitchell, I accept assignment to the Enhanced Operator Program. Mitchell nodded as if she had expected this response. I'm glad to hear that, Staff Sergeant. Your country needs people with your capabilities, and you have the potential to make a significant difference. When do I begin training? Today, Mitchell replied, sliding a thick folder across her desk. Your transport leaves in 2 hours. The training facility is located in a place that doesn't appear on any maps, conducting programs that officially don't exist. Santos opened the folder and found travel documents, temporary identification, and briefing materials marked with classification levels she had never seen before. Her civilian identity would be maintained as cover, but her real life was now beginning. Staff Sergeant Santos, Director Mitchell said, I want you to understand something important. The program you're entering will change you in ways you can't anticipate. You'll develop capabilities beyond what you demonstrated in testing, but you'll also face challenges that will test every aspect of your character. I understand, ma'am. I don't think you do, but that's not a criticism. Nobody can understand until they experience it. What I will tell you is this. Enhanced operators are the closest thing our country has to superheroes, but they're still human beings with human limitations and human needs. Don't lose sight of that. Santos nodded, though she wasn't sure she fully grasped the warning. Her focus was on the opportunities ahead, the chance to serve at the highest levels, and make a real difference in global security. 2 hours later, Santos boarded an unmarked aircraft at a private airfield outside Washington. She was the only passenger, accompanied by a flight crew that operated under the same security protocols that governed her assignment. The aircraft's destination was classified, its flight plan known only to a handful of controllers with appropriate clearance. As the plane climbed into the clear morning sky, Santos looked down at the countryside below and thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months earlier, she had been an unknown soldier hoping for assignment to special operations. Now she was beginning a career that would take her into the shadows of international conflict and national security. The ranch in Montana seemed impossibly distant, both geographically and conceptually. The girl who had learned to shoot deer and elk in the Beartooth Mountains was becoming someone who would engage human targets in places that didn't officially exist. The transformation was both exciting and sobering. Santos pulled out the advanced tablet she had been issued and began reading her first mission briefings. The scenarios were complex and dangerous, involving threats that she had never imagined. But they were also intellectually challenging, requiring the kind of precision and judgment that her unique abilities made possible. As the aircraft flew toward its classified destination, Santos reflected on the choice she had made. She was embarking on a career that would demand everything she had to give, with risks that extended far beyond personal danger. But she was also joining an elite community dedicated to preventing conflicts that could reshape the world. Her exceptional marksmanship abilities had opened doors she never knew existed. Now she would discover what lay beyond those doors, and whether she possessed not just the skills but the strength to succeed in the most demanding military service available. The plane continued its journey toward a future that would test every aspect of Maria Santos's character, abilities, and commitment to serving her country. Behind her, the familiar world of conventional military service receded into memory. Ahead lay challenges that would either forge her into one of the most effective operators in the world or destroy her in the attempt. For the young woman from Montana, who had started this journey by outshooting Navy SEALs, the greatest adventures were just beginning. The colonel who had initially scoffed at her firing range request had unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would reshape how the military understood human potential and exceptional service. As the aircraft disappeared into classified airspace, carrying Santos toward her new life, the only certainty was that the world had gained a protector whose capabilities transcended normal human limitations. Whether that would be enough for the challenges ahead remained to be seen. The girl who had once hunted elk in the Montana wilderness was now hunting threats that could endanger millions of lives. It was a transformation that few could achieve and fewer could survive. But Maria Santos had never backed down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. Her story was just beginning, written in classifications that would never see public light, measured in conflicts that would never make headlines, and defined by a service that would never receive recognition. For Santos, it was exactly what she had always wanted, the opportunity to make a difference that truly mattered.